Utah. Oh, yes. And he earned his master's in linguistics from the University of Utah and did coursework toward his PhD in Near Eastern languages and linguistics. His coursework in Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, and Egyptian is followed by years of personal study in those languages, and then several dozen Native American first American languages, and he's presented many papers in conferences and published articles. His major work has been the 2011 comparative vocabulary of the Uto-Aztecans. And that work with Uto-Aztecan languages has, of course, spread from Mexico across the western portion of the United States, pursuing the cognates of those people. Brian and his wife Sylvia are parents of 5 children. His book, Morsels for the Mind, mingled with mirth from the mountains, brought laughter from my wife while she was in the hospital. So I want to give it a special recommendation because not every textbook gives people laughter when they're sick. But this one, such a fascinating treatment, I recommend it. But then his book, The Changes in Languages from Nephi to Now, inspired me to book him for 2 sessions. The depth and breadth of his research merits our attention and acclaim, and I welcome him and ask that you stretch a bit to follow the results of his investigation. In his first session, he covered the first 5 chapters and introduced us to glottochronology and linguistics. Tonight, the Nephiim and the Mulakaim, and perhaps a bit of the Jaredite cognates will be open to us. And so if you would join me in prayer, I would appreciate it. Let us pray. Mind creating the universe, voice that whispers yet speaks with thunder. We seek to understand, to hear, to see your eternal wonder, to expand our perceptions, to embrace the possibility of your eternal dimensions, yet limited as we are, unable to stretch so far, tend to only see your personal attentions. We thank you for your word through personal experience and through scripture conferred, for it gives us hope, meaning, and long-term belonging. It gives us promise, though we be a doubting Thomas, that your purposes may be fulfilled in our lives prolonging. Your word transcends, blesses, heals, encourages, inspires, mends, and we delight in it as we trace it through our past. For you spoke to our fathers, our mothers, and our brothers. You continue to speak through your creation, so beautiful, so vast. This evening, we trace promises to the Jewish race, finding cognates beyond our normal cognition, and ask your blessing on our presenter, Brian Stubbs, who has the task to improve our recognition, that we see the tracks, verbal mentefacts that trace through our historic condition, to reveal to us more of your word, to discuss our purpose, our calling, our mission. Guide us, we ask, as we embrace this task, looking both at the surface and under, to understand your guiding hand in heaven and in this land, in creating a world full of wonder. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Jesus, the Word made flesh. Amen. Brian, the floor is yours. I'll stop share so you can get access. And thank you for coming back. We need to get you unmuted.
Okay. Unmute, hit share screen. Okay, can you all see the altar?
Yes.
Hey, good. Let me go to full screen here. I'm hoping this, well, let me see. Actually, I'll just expand it this way, and then I think last time I tried that, I kind of went off, so. Okay, I think it's probably all big enough. Let me just run through this one more time. Last time I told you about these letters that have NHM Nahom, but I took some time to go ahead and figure the rest of it out. This is Old Arabic language, a different branch of Semitic. By the way, I'm not sure we defined Semitic last time. Semitic is the language family that Hebrew and Arabic and Aramaic and ancient Akkadian, which is kind of where Assyrian and Babylonian come from, and Ethiopic down south of Egypt is a Semitic language, actually fairly closely related to Old South Arabian. Old South Arabian is just across the sea from Ethiopia, and their scripts are very similar. But this is a script I wasn't entirely familiar with. I have to, review it every time I go to use it. I mean, I read Arabic and Aramaic and Hebrew regularly, but this one I had to review. But we figured out the rest of these letters, and let me just tell you what the whole thing says. Actually, I have it right here. Ba'athar, that's a TH, that theta there. This is the B, that's the Ein, and B and Ein, and then the Th is there, and the T and the R, and so forth. Anyway, it says Ba'athar, son of Sawadum, son of Nahum, Nahami, or Nahomi. And in Semitic languages, they only write the consonants, not the vowels, or at least in the ancient ones. And an E on the end means a person from that area. So this is a person from Nahom. So this means a Nahomite. Now in Middle English, in the biblical, when they translated the English Bible, Ite was the typical ending for a people, Israelite, Edomite, and Mulekite, Nephite. I mean, those aren't in the Bible, but the Book of Mormon use the same thing. However, in actuality, in Semitic languages, they simply end the name with an E sound. For example, we say Israelite in biblical language, but how do they say it over in Israel? An Israeli. Okay, the person of Israel. So it just ends with an E. So the way you would say Nephite in Hebrew and in Egyptian and Arabic and all of these languages would simply be at an E at the end of it, and you already have Nephi, so it would just simply make a long E, or Nephi, and then the plural is Im, and so that's why in my book and Mr. DeBarth showed on his words also that from my book that I'm calling them Nephiyim and Mulekiyim, because that's how you would say it in Hebrew. For the plural, a singular would simply be Nephi or a Nephite. And a Nahomi, a person from Nahom, is a Nahomi. And that's exactly what we have in these last four letters. Anyway, okay, let's get back into the presentation. I'm thinking we might just review a little bit briefly. There might be some who weren't here, and others of you, it was kind of quick, and you only seen it once. Let's just look at it briefly at a few slides. Here are the language families of North America. You can see that there are many of them. And tonight, this one is Uto-Aztecan in the green. This is Comanche, by the way. It broke off from Shoshone up here, so that's why it's kind of by itself. Then all of these, it doesn't show any further south, but all along the west coast of Mexico are the various Uto-Aztecan languages. In fact, here they are. Here's another slide of them. Can everybody read the writing okay and hear my voice okay?
I hear your voice.
Okay. And anyway, the Uto-Aztecan language family, like I said, the northern half of it came out of the Los Angeles area, and it spread out into the Great Basin. The southern Uto-Aztecans, the southern half of it, is all along the west coast of Mexico, except for the Nahua dialects. And we have a slide to show those. Yeah, they're right here. Quite a few of them. Actually, there are 30 of them or more. This shows the major Nahua dialects, and so they are spread out a lot. And we'll talk about that more later as we get into it. Okay, last time we showed you some data, some of the words, some of the sound changes in words of the of Semitic P and Egyptian. What I want to do is kind of explain to you. In fact, let me need to find it here. Yeah, this is it. We explained that when languages change, the sounds change in consistent patterns. And we showed you examples from Germanic and from Old Indo-European and then Germanic and then English and German, how those sounds changed in consistent patterns. What we have in Uto-Aztecan is two different groups that came together and mixed. And one of the groups were speaking Semitic. I call it Semitic P. It's a Semitic language. And the reason I call it Semitic P is because B changed to P. So I just call that group of that people were speaking Semitic P and Egyptian, because the Semitic P words and the Egyptian words all have these same sound changes or sound correspondences. B went to P, and glottal stop went to W, and caw went to K most of the time, and especially at the beginning of a word, sometimes H in the middle of a word, and saw to S, and so forth. However, tonight we're going to look at another set of data, and we'll just briefly look at a few examples of each one so we don't burden you with too much data. But in this particular Semitic languages, that things changed differently. The B changed to qua. Now that might look strange, but in Indo-European, you have Latin qua corresponding to Greek P. We have that in quarter and pentagon. The word for, well, let's see, quinque and penta are the two words for five in Greek in Latin and Greek. And so it happens often enough in language change, this kind of qua going with a bilabial like B. So B changed to qua. The glottal stop is basically lost. That's what this circle with a line through it means went to zero. And the caw went to the pharyngeal haw. Now this, I have this highlighted because this explains, is a very specific marker for this being Phoenician sound changes. See, this change from caw is the old Israelite form, and that did not change until about just before the time of Christ. However, in Phoenician, it made this change more than 1,000 years earlier than that. In fact, the Phoenician alphabet only has this. It does not have a caw, it has this. So when the Phoenicians created their alphabet, which, a lot of people are guessing 1200 BC, possibly before. When that happened, this sound change had already happened in Phoenician, but it didn't happen until 1,000 years later. This sound change eventually happened in Hebrew too, just because they lived with it for 1,000 years, but it didn't happen in Hebrew until 1,000 years later, just before Christ. So in Lehi's time, or before Jerusalem was destroyed, this is the sound change that the Israelites would have been speaking, but this is the sound change that the Phoenicians had already been speaking for 500 years. So it's really interesting that this particular language or contribution to Uto-Aztecan has this sound change. That is another hint that the Mulek group, the Jewish group that included the infant Mulek, as Brother DeBarth was explaining, was probably on a Phoenician ship, and probably with a sizable crew or group of people who spoke Phoenician, not the Israeli Semitic. Now, the two of them are close enough. There are different dialects of the same language. They're close enough that naturally they would just kind of meld together and be speaking the same thing in a few weeks or months. But the fact that this sound change happens in Semitic Kwa, and the fact that they named their river Sidon, and we say Sidon in English, but Sidon in ancient Hebrew and Phoenician, both of those suggest that they were with a Phoenician group, that they came across on a Phoenician vessel. Now, you know, in the Book of Mormon, it doesn't tell us how they got across. It just says the Nephites found them about 200 BC, about 400 years after they both got here. And then they found out their history, and the Nephites taught them their language and so forth. But these two little facts, that sound change and the fact that they named their major river Sidon, suggests they came across on a Phoenician vessel, because Sidon was not part of Israeli geography. So if it was only a group of Jews, they built their own ship and whatever, they would not likely name their river Sidon. Okay, hey, let's kind of go ahead and jump into today's. I think we showed you this. In fact, it's talking about language mixtures, and just as what we have in the Americas, in fact, let me go back to the other slide so this doesn't confuse you. I'll explain a little bit. What we have in the Americas is Lehi landed somewhere, and the Nephites lived somewhere. I'm not an archaeologist. I have, you know, a guess, but I mean, I kind of go with the Mesoamerican archaeology generally, just because I think it's probably fits a lot of things a little better, but I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not going to argue for or against anything very much. But wherever they landed, they would have been living next to other Native Americans who, and it caused their language to change a little bit, and they probably borrowed some words from it and so forth. And the Mulekites, or this Phoenician Jewish group, they landed somewhere, and they lived next to a different people, and that caused their language to change. In fact, in the Otomanguean languages near where I think these Phoenicians lived, they had no bilabials. They had no B or P. And so for the B to go to Kwa is quite understandable in that environment. So they were both changing in different directions before they ever met 400 years later. Then when they meet, their languages mix. But as it says, the Lehites taught the people of Zarahemla the Nephite language. And so and that's exactly what the data suggest that we find in Uto-Aztecan, is that about of the ancient Near East vocabulary, about 3/4 of it fits this Semitic P or Egyptian. Actually, there are about 700 items of the Semitic P, 400 of Egyptian, and there are 400 of Semitic Kwa. So this is about 3/4. Lehi is about 3/4 of it, the contribution, and Mulek is about 1/4. Now, people think, well, you're just calling a lot of stuff to mix them up. However, 400 is more than enough to establish a verifiable language component. And the fact that all of these are 400 or more makes this a very strong case. Remember last time we showed you some language families that were established on 100 cognate sets or less. Okay, these Semitic Kwa has 400, Egyptian has 400, Semitic P about 700, altogether about over 1,500. And so it's a very strong case of these two components coming together. Okay, now let's go back, and because all these are language mixtures, and we've told you, that Yiddish is a language mixture. Yiddish are the Jews that came up from the Mediterranean. They figure they started in probably Italy, Rome, the Roman Empire, somewhere, and gradually gravitated north, different Jewish groups. And then as they went north, they associated with some Slavic speakers in West Asia or Eastern Europe. And then they ended up in the Germanic areas, and they developed their own language of Yiddish during that time. And Yiddish consists of about 15 to 20% being Hebrew and Aramaic, but 80 or 85%, the great majority of Yiddish, is simply German. There are also some Slavic words, but it shows that Yiddish is a language mix that the Jewish people were speaking as they traveled northward in Europe. And what's interesting is that in Yiddish, most of the body parts are from German, Kopf, Oig, Hand, like English hand, Herz, Knie, Fuß, and so forth, just like German. Yet a high percentage of Uto-Aztecan things that we find are the body parts that are Semitic, and animal terms and basic nouns of nature, rock and sun and so forth. But they both have the kind of the grammar of whatever language they live next to. Neither one of them retains Semitic grammar very well. And so, okay, this, I hope we can come back to this. I don't want to confuse you. This is a little bit. Let me just briefly read the yellow part. The Uto-Aztecan Near East Thai explains 7 of 9 phonological puzzles that were previously unexplained in Uto-Aztecan. In other words, Uto-Aztecan specialists, PhDs in linguistics, have found that there are about 9 things that they cannot figure out. Why this inconsistency and why that? And for 100 years, Edward Sapir established the language family in 1915. And then I published the book that Jerry helped me get out and sponsor in 2015, exactly 100 years later. And it explains, it shows how Semitic and Egyptian explain 7 of those 9. So it's very solid, strong case. I'll just say that about it. That other stuff we'll wait on. And I think we talked about this. I think we mentioned maktesh in Hebrew, the grinding stone, makta or matta in Uto-Aztecan. And we talked about how the KT cluster here, usually very often in Uto-Aztecan and in English, when you have 2 consonants together, the first one assimilates to the second, or it could go to a glottal stop like this. The K went to a glottal stop, but in one of the languages, it doubled the T, and it even shows the final esh, matash and kawiya. Okay, and this is where I explain basically what I said. Both the Semitic P and the Egyptian parallels with Uto-Aztecan have the same sound correspondences as spoken by one group. However, a sizable yet separate set of data have a different set of sound correspondences in which Semitic B became Uto-Aztecan qua. And I mentioned the Greek P and Latin qua correspondence. These 2 separate Semitic entities merged in Uto-Aztecan, a Phoenician-like Semitic qua, where B goes to qua, and an Aramaic-like Semitic P, where B goes to P. Furthermore, Semitic P has Israelite sound changes. We talked about that already. While Semitic Qua has Phoenician sound changes. What might this mean? Hey, we're going to talk about that too. And here I list the sound changes, okay? I don't expect to remember all these, but last week we showed you examples of B to P, glottal stop to W, K to K, K to K, and Sa to S, R to R, G to K, and Va to Ta. For the Mulekite sound changes, B to Qua, and like I said, glottal stop disappears. This goes to the pharyngeal H. That's not a regular H like this one is over here on the left. This one is a deep pharyngeal H. It's very different. And the Sa to Tsa, and the R goes to Y or I. Both of those are the same thing, by the way. Ya and E, these are pronounced, the E is pronounced E in linguistic lingo and in most languages. It's only English that changed the E to I. The word for I, it used to be ik in Old English, like ich, German. And then after the K dropped off, it became E, and then it changed from E to I, and all of the sounds consistently changed from E to I. And that's another example of a consistent sound change. The G went to Ng, well, and the Z went to S. So see, very different sound changes. And we're gonna talk about those a bit, but we talked about that last time. And these are the beginning of this Phoenician or early Hebrew stuff. And we mentioned these last time. Uto-Aztecan, the plural suffix is ima. In old pre-Hebrew or some Phoenician dialects or an Ugaritic, the plural suffix is ima. In biblical Hebrew, it's simply im. It lost the final but it is im. But it was originally ima, and in Uto-Aztecan we have ima, which suggests it might be from the Phoenician, okay? Not from the Mulek Jewish group, but from the Phoenician language that still had that and all of these and so forth. We talked about those last time. Okay, this is new stuff. We are in the new stuff now. These are examples of B going to qua and R going to Y. Bashel means to be boiled or to cook or to ripen. Quasa, and this capital C is, this means that the linguist can see that there was a final consonant, because when it's combined with another word, it doubles that next consonant, but they don't know what it is because it does not appear clearly in any language, but they know that it's underlying there because of what it does to the next word. So bashel and quasa, everything matches. The B to qua and the L is still shows that it's there. Basar, okay, means flesh and otherwise. Uto-Aztecan quasi, B to qua, and notice the final R to E, or the whole syllable R going to E. And Hebrew bala, swallow. Quelo, remember the line goes to W or to U or to O, the forms of rounding. And so here we have the B to qua, the L remains L, and the line to rounding, a nice match. This is a wonderful example. This is Old Semitic. Bahamat means back. And by the way, the plural of it would be bahamot, backs, or usually of big animals. It also means hill. It's where our English word behemoth comes from, behemoth. We often say it in English. It's a borrowing from Hebrew, a big thing. Okay, it's from a big animal generally. But in Semitic, it's bahamat, singular, and it means back is the basic meaning. And Uto-Aztecan quahami, and it means exactly back. And it has a wonderful match, and so forth. Oh, here's some that show R to Y, bar and quia. Although one language actually has an R, quira, earth, land and earth. Baram, quiam, taber, tequi. Anyway. Again, the line goes to W or U, some kind of rounding. Alakat, leech, walaka, snail. Okay, they're both very similar in their texture. You know, slimy, creepy things that go slow and so forth. Here's some more that Ya'ar, woods, to Yowi, Sa'ar, Suwi, and so Mara to Miya, Kara to Kia. And we already showed you Bara to Quia. Okay. The pharyngeal ha to hu, or to rounding. Who might smear or spread, rub, paint, from, cover with, smear on, and a whole bunch of them. Here, let's go to this one is sa to tsa. Remember, this is Semitic qua. So sadoh, tsayel matches perfectly. The S, the sa to the tsa, like we said, and the R to Y, and the pharyngeal to rounding. So gazelle, an antelope, savi savi from Semitic, servi, and hopi. Everything matches nicely. Here's an, well, yeah, sur, cricket, sort, cricket. Okay. Oh, what did I do? I skipped a bunch, didn't I? Where were we? Okay, we did that. And we did that. I did skip a bunch. Okay. Here are some others, but let's skip those through. You had enough examples to show that they are different, to introduce you very briefly to the Semitic Kwa contribution to Uto-Aztecan. Now, what happens in language is that sometimes you'll have two words from the same ancient word. For example, in English, from Old Germanic skirt or skirt, it stayed with a SK sound in the northern Germanic languages like Danish and Norwegian and Swedish and so forth. It stayed a skirt or skirt with the SK sound. And that was later borrowed into English, modern English, or Middle English, I should say, when the Vikings were invading England. However, in Old English, the SK had changed to an SH, and it was the word shirt in Old English, but skirt is from North Germanic, a borrowing. And we have both of them in English, but they are a little different meaning, right? You have a shirt, we know what a shirt is in English, and a skirt is something different. It's in the lower half, worn by women generally. But you can probably imagine that originally just came from like a gunny sack type of clothing where you got a hole in the top for a head and a hole in the arms, and it covers the whole thing from maybe shoulders to knees, and it became shirt in the Old English and skirt in Northern Germanic. And so we have both of those words from the same original word. We also have many such pairs in Uto-Aztecan. From Semitic agap, with a glottal stop, wing, pinion feather, arm, as you stretch out of an arm or a bird stretches out of its wing, it's called the same thing. And Uto-Aztecan, we have wakapu with the glottal stop to W, like we have in Semitic P, and the G to K, and so forth, and it means the same thing, wing, feather. But in Semitic Kwa, that same word agap, and it's actually agapu originally, and that's another interesting thing, is that these Semitic things have that final vowel that was lost in Biblical Hebrew, but was in earlier forms of Hebrew. Agap, same thing, but remember the glottal stop disappears in Semitic Kwa, and the G changes to Nga, and it's Angapu, okay? We also have this word for flesh in both. Uto-Aztecan from basar in Aramaic, bisa in Uto-Aztecan, basar in Hebrew, and kwasi in Uto-Aztecan. So again, another pair. Okay, what might be learned from Uto-Aztecan? And I briefly talked about this, but let's just make sure we've covered everything. First, the Lehi Ishmael group spoke a Hebrew-Aramaic mix. Hebrew was not spoken where Abraham came from and was not Israel's original language. We mentioned this last time, but hey, there might be a few new people. Let's just run through it briefly. But was Israel's dialect of Canaanite, Phoenician, adopted after entering Palestine. Leah and Rachel spoke Aramaic as daughters of Laban the Aramaean. Genesis 25:20 says exactly that. Now in the English translation, in the King James, it says Laban the Syrian. But in the Hebrew, it says Laban ha'arami. Remember Arami, that E ending means a person from Aram or an Aramaean. That's exactly what it means. So Laban the Aramaean, they spoke Aramaic where they all came from. And biblical scholars are now thinking that the northern kingdom Israelites kept speaking their Aramaic. They might have learned the Canaanite Phoenician Hebrew language also, or probably bilingual, but they figure that many of them remained Aramaic speakers. 6 generations after Nephi, after the Nephi-Muleki merger in Zarahemla, in Hagos Day, thousands of people launched into the West Sea and sailed to the land northward. That's in those verses. Notice in the map, the next slide here, and we've already talked about that, that 29 of the 30 Uto-Aztecan languages are either on the west coast of Mexico or extended out of the Los Angeles area. Now going back to the other one, hey, I just told you all that. Okay, so that's 29 of the 30 Uto-Aztecan languages. The other one is Nahua, which is further all the dialects of Nahua or Nahuatl that are to the southeast of this map. And so I created a separate map for that. I borrowed out of Magnus Farrow Hansen's website. He's a Nahua specialist, but he doesn't know much about anything about the rest of Uto-Aztecan. And these are the major dialects, and you can see they're scattered all over Mexico. And this is a map of Mexico just showing the mountains. The green stuff is the mountains, and if you kind of overlay this particular map only goes up to about right here. Notice the mountainous stuff here, a whole bunch of mountains in the middle here, and then a couple of forks that go up like Y's. And if you look at these, you notice that these are in the mountains with a couple of forks that go up like Y's. It looks like the Uto-Aztecan people were mountain people. In fact, in Southern California, they went up in the mountains, many of them. And then the Utes and the Shoshones and the all of those that spread out in the Great Basin, they were basically mountain dwellers. And it might be that the Aztecs or the Nahua languages might be left over. They might not have been involved in instruction because they were the Gadian robbers, who, remember, were people that left the Nephite deserters, and so they're still speaking the language. Maybe that's what some of those Nahua dialects are, as leftovers of that. I don't know. I'm just tossing that out. Okay, a third thing we might learn from Uto-Aztecan. The Uto-Aztecan suggests that in 1 Nephi 1 and 2, the language of the Egyptians means the language of the Egyptians. Remember last time we talked about that division among LDS scholars. Laban's Josephite lineage kept the brass plates, apparently a House of Joseph record that was later combined with the record of the Jews. Now the languages on those brass plates, and remember that's the argument. Some think that it was Hebrew written in the Egyptian script, and others say, like Nibley, that it was the actual Egyptian language in some parts, that they knew both languages. And what I'm saying, if it started with Joseph of Egypt, Israel's son, then the Egyptian language was likely the initial language on the plates, because that's what was spoken in Egypt, where he had lived most of his life. And he had two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh, were born of an Egyptian-speaking mother, and they were raised in Egypt before their Semitic-speaking cousins came to town. So they spoke Egyptian. The whole family spoke Egyptian. Joseph was a ruler in Egypt, so he would be speaking Egyptian. And remember that Moses was raised in Egyptian courts. And Egyptian was the native language of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Moses. And Hebrew writing did not exist yet in Joseph's day. So if Joseph started the record, which is a very good probability, in fact, there's some question whether it was just barely getting established in Moses' day. It might have been established in Moses' day. But anyway, the only choice for Joseph of Egypt to write in was Egyptian, because Hebrew had not been invented yet, or the writing system had not been invented yet, though they were speaking it, of course, through Palestine. And this just tells that the alphabet hadn't been invented yet. I don't think we need to go through all of this. I'll just summarize it that way. Well, let's see. The dates, I'll just read the highlights. The dates for the Phoenician Hebrew alphabet precluded Joseph from its use. And for Moses, we don't know for sure, what the situation was, how often he went, after he was weaned. What's that, age 3? I don't know, possibly 4. I mean, he certainly had a foundation in the Semitic of his people, but he was taken to Egypt and raised in Egypt's court. Who knows how much he associated with his people out there. He might have been bilingual and knew both of them. And then again, it's possible that he only knew Egyptian really well and he didn't know the Semitic language very well. And then he left at age 40, went over to live with Jethro's people for the next 40 years, comes back at age 80, not the optimum age for achieving fluency in a second language, to lead the enslaved Semites or Israelites back to Canaan and resume adopting Hebrew the Canaanite speakers. That might be why he needed a spokesman, because, hey, the Lord tells him, hey, yeah, okay, you, Aaron, be the spokesman for Moses, because he was not fluent in the language. He probably understood it to a decent degree, but might not have been as fluent as Aaron and those who were native speakers of the Israelite language at that time. Fourth thing we might learn, and I've already explained this, yes, the kata, the pharyngeal ha, happened in Phoenician sound changes, but had not happened yet in Israeli. And the fact that the river was named Sidon, both of those suggest a Phoenician vessel. That's how they came across. Okay, now we're going to launch into interesting stuff on these other language families. We talked about, we briefly told you last time that Uto-Aztecan is over here, and Algonquian, or the east half of Algic, is in this area. And then Muskogean is down here in the southeast. Muskogean is the language family. It's a small language family of Creek, Alabama, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Coasati, and so forth, but a very interesting language family. And then down in South America, not on this map, we have Quechua, which is spoken in about 5 different countries. It's all along the Andes, Colombia on the north through Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia, and even the northwest corner of Argentina is a dialect or two of Quechua, and then some in Chile. About 6 million speakers of Quechua through those 6 Andean countries. Anyway, we're going to look at those other 3 language families very briefly. For example, let's look at Muskogean first in the southeast United States. Remember, we showed you the word hotpa, meaning peace or peaceable, kind. For the sun to go down, to be buried. Well, in Hopi, in the Uto-Aztecan, Hopi with a double P also means peaceable, well-behaved. Okay, remember we told you the 2 consonants together, sometimes the first one will change to be the same as the second, such that you have a doubled thing, a doubled consonant like we do in English, you know, the in legal went to illegal with 2 L's. And in Hopi, it's a doubled P, and in Muskogean, it's a doubled P. Exact same words, Hopi, except that in Muskogean, it has all 3 meanings of Egyptian. It means peaceable or peace, and it means to bury, and it means for the sun to go down. Now, that's an interesting combination of meanings that are in the original Egyptian and also in Muskogean. Hopi kept one of the meanings, and it kept the meaning of go down in some other languages, but the Muskogean actually kept all the meanings better than Uto-Aztecan did. Egyptian PDS, that verb, padas, we don't know the vowels, but it means to beat flat or flatten. Pitasa in Uto-Aztecan, remember the D changed to T, it's got it all there, it means to flatten. Muskogean, same thing, patasa, to spread flat. Remember, and then here's the Egyptian lanok, that's that K-like sound. With a line that goes to W, well, in Muskogean, we have winaki. This is a suffix, and winak, and with a suffix, means alive. It's exactly what it means in Egyptian, is alive. And we also have another form in Muskogean, other languages, alive, ok. We do have onk. Onk in Uto-Aztecan very well matches this. The N was lost in this form, but so again, Near East words in both the same word in both Muskogean and Uto-Aztecan. Nali, okay, or Nala is how it would be pronounced in some verb forms. And glottal stop, I mean not glottal stop, line, which goes to W, remember, means to travel basically, or go. Uto-Aztecan, Nawa, to go. Muskogean, Nowa, to go. It just changes the vowel a little bit to better match the U. Ana in Aramaic and Arabic, that's the word for I in both of those. And very often the first vowel is lost. In fact, in Syriac, that vowel is lost. There's just na. In Uto-Aztecan, we have na, exact same thing with a vowel change, the first one lost. But in Muskogean, we have anaat or ana'a. In other languages, exactly like the Aramaic, with the glottal stop and a little bit that comes after. Shikor, drunk. Uto-Aztecan, sikur, drunk. Muskogean, shko, drunk. I forgot to write there what it means. And remember, we just looked at maktesh, or maktash is probably another voweling. A mortar or a grinding stone. Uto-Aztecan, matta, and kawiya, matash. The verb that comes from is kt-esh, and it's kita should be one form of the verb, to grind. We also have in Uto-Aztecan kitasu, grind. And by the way, that final vowel could be a plural, or it could mean an original final vowel. Let's go again, same thing, just about. Kitush, a pestle, that's a grinding stone. The one on top, though, that you grind on the bottom grinding stone. Kiti, mortar or grinding stone. Interesting. There are about 200 or more, 200 or 300 of these words that are from Semitic and Egyptian that are in Uto-Aztecan and also in Muskogean. Another one, yeah, Yabka, the Semitic, Yakka, Uto-Aztecan, Yakkan, all meaning cry. We already mentioned this one. It's also in Muskogean, Waka. Another one, the Shaul, Shaula, a female fox. Tula, Muskogean, Sukkah, hut, booth, shelter. Chuka, house. And so forth. We don't have time to bore you with all of the data, but we've shown you enough that you got the idea that Muskogean has a lot of the same interesting things, same words, same sound changes as Uto-Aztecan of both the Semitic and Egyptian stuff. Let's look at Algic, the Algonquian languages in the northeast North America. The suffix pronouns, ni of Algonquian, well, no, the Algonquian pronouns, period, are ni, ki, we, nu, and sometimes it's just the consonant. And they are the Hebrew object pronouns. It confused me at first because I usually put the Hebrew on the left and the Native American on the right, but this time I switched them for some reason. Yeah, Hebrew object pronouns are ni and ki, ke, ka, and o and w, and nu for we. And Algonquian languages have the exact same pronouns, except they are both subject and object in Algonquian, whereas they're only object pronouns in Hebrew. Remember, it was anat for the subject pronoun that we just showed you in Aramaic. And that happens often too. It's happened in English. You, for example, is originally an object pronoun. Thou or thou or du in Germanic is you subject, but you is the old object pronoun that became a subject pronoun. So that happened in English as well. Tan, where, tani, where, a question marker you put at the beginning of a sentence. Is this the case that Ina in Egyptian, Ina in Algonquian, exact same thing. Waban, to dawn or for the sun to come up, Wapani in Algonquian. Okay, this is interesting stuff. This is something y'all are seeing that I have not published in a book yet. Remember I told you that the way you would say Nephite, actually a Nephi or Nephi, the original vowel would be Napi or Nafi. In Arabic, it's Nafi. And in original Semitic, there is no A, or like Nephi, it's A. And so what's interesting is that in Algonquian, it's got that same, in fact, also in Uto-Aztecan and other places, that original vowel. And Napeu, Napi, with a long E, would be how you would say Nephite in Hebrew. And Nape is the way you say man in many Algonquian languages. And that W is added on somewhere. In fact, I think that's from the old, that came from some other suffix that got fossilized into it. But that's exactly the word for Nephite, meaning a man. Very interesting. And the plural of Nephites would be Napiyima or Nepiyima, or all of these E's, E-ye, could easily be and probably would be shortened to simply E. So Nepima, and Uto-Aztecan you have Pima, losing the first syllable. Nepome is another tribe, Uto-Aztecan tribe, one of the Pima tribes. So basically you have both the Algonquian people and the Nephite, and the Uto-Aztecan peoples, some groups still calling themselves Nephites. I mean, that's, in fact, the Ojibwe word, Anishinaabe, and I'm not sure where the stress or the accents are on this. Anishinaabe means an Ojibwe person. This is an Algonquian language. The way you would say in Hebrew, the people of Nephi, there is no of. The first noun would be possessed by the second. So the way you say people is anashi. Anashim, if it's not possessed, but if it's possessed, that final M drops off and it would be anashi napi. That's how you say the people of Nephi in Hebrew. Anishi nape only changed one vowel. That second vowel going from A to E, which is very understandable when the next one is that same vowel. It's just assimilating to the next vowel. It's a very common sound change. In fact, it happened in English a whole bunch of times. That's why I have foot and feet, because foot, the plural used to be foti, and then the plural went from foti to fiti, so that the second vowel matches the third. And that's how we get fot for singular and feet for plural feet. Same kind of sound change. Anishi nape. So this word means people of Nephi. That could mean that, but don't quote me on that and say, hey, Brian says, because what we would need to do is find 4 or 5 other examples of this same kind of thing. We need to verify it in a few different ways to really nail it down, and that's why it's not published in a book yet. But that's a very interesting, strong hint to search out and research. Okay, DWY is the root in Semitic for be sick. Dawa is one way it would be said, or dawi, another way it could be said. And depending on how it's used in Semitic. Algonquian, dawi, dawa, dawi, to have pain, ache. In Uto-Aztecan, dawoya, remember the D to T, there's a W, there's a Y, it's got all the consonant. In Uto-Aztecan, it also means sick. So these same words that are in Semitic are also in Algonquian and Uto-Aztecan. Aramaic, mishkach, to find, the infinitive of it. Kri, miskau. Even the rounding of the pharyngeal to W, it means find. Okay, a lot of interesting stuff. And I don't know that we have time to go through. Oh, here's an interesting one. Let's look at this last one. Yeah, in Aramaic, one of the words for baby is babus. And remember, in Aramaic, they put the on the end, like we showed you last time. So the baby, and that becomes the kind of the citation form in a lot of Aramaic dialects. Babusa. Well, what's the word in Algonquian for a baby? That's where papoose, English papoose, comes from. It's a borrowing from Algonquian papoose, meaning baby. Aramaic babusa, or babus is the noun. Okay, hey, it can't get much more interesting than that. Let's look at Quechua down in the Andes of Colombia. Oh, let's see, our time is getting close to up. We should be able to run through this pretty fast. These are items that are in either Egyptian or Semitic, and also in Uto-Aztecan, and also in Quechua. That capital Q means Quechua. Hobby, the pharyngeal plus a B plus a I, we'd expect who in Uto-Aztecan, we expect B to P, and there's the Y, hupia, a perfect match. In Quechua, upyai, okay? It's just a slight condensation of loss of some vowels, but very nearly the same. The boh, in Uto-Aztecan, D to T, B to P, and then the pharyngeal rounding to biwa. Quechua, tapu, that final U is going toward a W. Again, and Quechua and Uto-Aztecan word both matching the Egyptian. Tor, read in Egyptian. Tor, read in Uto-Aztecan. Totora, read in Quechua. Wonderful match. Kod or kote in Coptic, the later form of Egyptian, means to go around or to turn, to spin, those kinds of things. Uto-Aztecan, kuti. Wow, very close match to the Coptic voweling even. Quechua, exact same word, kuti, both mean to turn, spin, return, turn. Can't get better matches than that. Sun, to suffer. Uto-Aztecan, suna is a word for heart, but it has some verbs that mean to be sad or suffer. Sunku, it has a suffix, but Quechua uses the same word for heart. Muka, to be smitten in Hebrew. Muki, we saw that in Uto-Aztecan last time, to be sick, afflicted, die. Muki, suffer in silence, being smitten or afflicted. In Quechua, yeah, same word. Now this is interesting. The Semitic word for salt is milch. with MIL, and then that pharyngeal, which should be a W or a U or a round vowel, remember? Quechua, the word for salt is milu, a perfect match. M to M, L to L, and the pharyngeal to U. Uto-Aztecan does not use a Semitic word, but it uses the Egyptian word for salt, which is pharyngeal, M, and glottal stop in Uto-Aztecan omwa. So it's interesting that Quechua is using the Semitic word, Uto-Aztecan using the Egyptian word. Oh, here's a wonderful one. You know, you've all heard the word harem. Okay, that's borrowed from Arabic, haram. And haram means woman or wife. In Uto-Aztecan, warume means woman. See the pharyngeal to the O, R to R, M to M. And in Quechua, waterme means woman. Pharyngeal to W, R to R, M to M. So both Uto-Aztecan and Quechua have that Semitic word for woman. Okay, and there's a bunch of others. I don't know that we need to go through all of them. Yeah, in fact, let's not, because interest of time. More, and we could go on for a long time. There's some more. Oh, by the way, yeah, sweet potato, kamota, kamat in Semitic. KM glottal stop right there. It's the second one I'm talking about. Uto-Aztecan kamota, sweet potato. In Semitic, it means truffle, which is a food that grows underground on a root system, just like potatoes grow underground on a root system. So a slight different change of meaning, but it's very similar. And Quechua, kumara. Also in the Polynesian languages, you have kumara, but in Quechua, it's kumara. They put that extra on there as the Polynesian form. That's a very interesting word that has been discussed by the scholars for a long time. Okay, now we got some DNA parallels. This is the interesting stuff, and we're just about to the end, and then we can take questions. Yeah, DNA parallels between Arabs and Uto-Aztecan peoples have been published in 4 publications, and these are the publications. In fact, I'll show you. There they are right there. We'll show you those later if you want to look at them. They note various human lymphocyte antigens prominent in North Africa, Arab areas, and in Southwest Asia. The Palestine area is Southwest Asia, Palestine, and then Anatolia, just north of Palestine, which is now Turkey, and so forth. The antigens that are in the Semitic areas in the Old World, and also in some Native American groups, are these, quite a few of them. And let me just stop here for a moment. You know, the anthropologist and the news and those that carry anthropological stories always go with mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to daughter. So you can go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years, and you'll have a few million ancestors, and one of those will be your mother's 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 mother, and so forth. And one other of those will be your father's father, 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 and so forth, the Y chromosome. And there's all the rest in the middle do not fit that, okay? Would have something else, whatever that father or mother was. And so that, they say from that, you know, hey, well, there's no DNA evidence for Semitic peoples in the Americas. Well, there is. It just needs to be researched more carefully and more thoroughly. They haven't taken a lot of samples from a lot of people, but what's interesting is that in fact, yeah, I've got the book right here. I'm gonna, can you see it in my picture? This book, written by Stephen Jett, Ancient Ocean Crossings, has a chapter on DNA, Old World DNA, proving ocean crossings. He's not LDS, not in the Book of Mormon, but he presents good evidence that there are transoceanic genetic transplants in the Americas from the Old World. In fact, he is one of these right there, Jet. Anyway, B21 was not found in most of indigenous America. So it's not in all Native American languages. In fact, not very many. And it's only in 1% in India, Japan, China, Mongolia, Malaysia, Cambodia, and the Philippines, and was not found at all in Australia, Micronesia, nor in most of the rest of Asia. Yet the high occurrence areas have been the following, given in percentages of this human lymphocyte antigen B21. And I'm going to show you those right now. These are the highest percentages of occurrence in these areas. Saudi Arabia has 22% of their population having that. That's huge compared to 0. In fact, I'm going to highlight this. Yeah, remember, most of Asia has 0 to 1%, but Saudi Arabia has 22%. Tigray people in Ethiopia, another Arab area just south of Egypt, has 21.3%. Jordan, Palestine sample test showed 16%. Papago, that's a Pima group in southern Arizona, the Papago, just they're between Phoenix and Tucson. They have 12.5% and 12.1% in the Tuareg, which are just west of Egypt. 12% the Berbers, also just west of Egypt. This is the only one that's really not in the vicinity. It's way down in Central Africa. 9.5% in Iraq. 9.4% in Pima. This is another Uto-Aztecan language or group of Uto-Aztecan language speakers. 8.9 among the Turks. That's just north of Palestine. That's part of the same area. Turkey and just north of Palestine. 7.5 in Central America, in a Central American composite study, which mainly consists of Uto-Aztecan peoples. 6.8 in Lebanon. So those are the top 12 areas in the world of this B21 antigen. These others, are not quite as high, although 3.5 is Nawa. Most of these are in Europe and a few in the Middle East, Iran, and so forth. But these top 12, of the top 12, taking the top 4, 3, I've got it right here somewhere. Yeah, the 3 highest percentages, just reading at the bottom here with you. The 3 highest percentages are in the heart of the Arab world. And the 4th highest is in Papago, a Uto-Aztecan language in Arizona. And then considering the top 12, 11 of the top 12 areas, these on the left that I have highlighted, are Arab areas or Uto-Aztecan peoples. 11 of them are Arab areas, 3 of them are Uto-Aztecan peoples. 11 of the 12. Now, is that fascinating, interesting, or what? Okay, here's a picture of that book I was talking to you about. And here's some other information on others of those. Stephen Jett is the one who has all of this between pages 345 and 353. I think it's chapter 31 of his book. He published Ancient Ocean Crossings in 2017, 4 years ago. And he did not know of my language findings in the Eastern US and the Andes, but he did know of my Uto-Aztecan work. And Jett also notes that B21 is, besides being very prominent in Uto-Aztecan and in Arab, it's also in the northern Andes. Now, what's interesting is he is finding DNA evidence in the same areas that I am finding language evidence, but he did not know of my language findings, except for Uto-Aztecan. He did not know about the stuff I just showed you in Muskogean and in Algonquian and in the Andes. And yet here he is saying that this one is not only in Uto-Aztecan and in the Arab areas, but also in the northern Andes. B17 and B37 are in both Arabs and Uto-Aztecan peoples. B14 is high in the Mediterranean. Okay, that's where Palestine is and where the Jews spread all around the Mediterranean. So B14 is high in the Mediterranean and in the Andes, and also in Mesoamerica, but not as high a percentage. A1 is Mediterranean and Caucasoid areas and the Andes. Okay, so it's very interesting to me that he is finding these genetic markers in the Near East and in Uto-Aztecan and in the Andes, when I never told him anything about my findings in the Andes. Now, these others are not necessarily, probably not relevant to Book of Mormon necessarily, but nevertheless, they are interesting evidence of transoceanic crossings from whatever people. Mitochondrial X is from Anatolia or the Levant. Remember, that's Palestine, and Anatolia is just north of it, Turkey area. And from there, he said that it seems to have started there, and then it went to some areas in Europe, and then to North American groups, but it's not in Central America nor in South America. You know, are the Vikings a possibility for that? I don't know. Other markers in South Asia and in Middle and South America, but not in North Asia and not in North America, suggest that it crossed, that there is a Pacific crossing that did not involve the Northern Asia by the Bering Strait nor North America. So good evidence of some kind of ocean crossing that didn't get up in the north areas. Okay, there are the sources, the 4 sources where that is published. And here's that last slide that we showed you last time. If you want to read the article answering the critics and 44 rebuttal points, it explains the only 2 linguists who have tried to take it down. But most, in fact, of all other linguists, a number of them have had positive comment on this, or they are silent, but not very many say negative things about this research. Okay, I think that then all these last 4 slides are simply a bibliography, but it's a very abbreviated bibliography because the real bibliography is about 50 pages in 3 of my books, and so I just got some of the main stuff. Okay, what would you like to review, or I'll just come back to some. I'll come back here toward the beginning in case you want to talk about any of this stuff. Any questions now? Let's see, what time is it?
Brian, I'm going to claim my host opportunity here to stick in the first question. You mentioned the tuo as the reed in Egypt and in Peru, or among the Quechua. I find that most interesting because Tor Heyerdahl's study showed that the reed boats had a lot of similarities between those produced on Lake Chad and those produced along the Nile. Very curious that you find this cognate showing a linguistic tie, as well as the construction tie of types of watercraft.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, and it's in the word. The Egyptian word is in both Uto-Aztecan and Quechua too. So interesting stuff. Yeah. All I can say is yes.
Well, let me yield to other people that have questions.
Just a detail. Go back to slide 86.
Okay, slide 86. Let's go to that.
Yes. We have the different countries. If you go to the right one, you mention, because I'm from Belgium, but Belgium actually composes of the Walloon part, the Flemish part, and the German part. So which part are you referring to as being Belgium there?
Which say that again? Which what?
Belgium actually was a Roman province, but it composes of a group of language, the Walloon part, which is the French part, and then the northern part is the Flemish part, which goes together, which is the same language as the Netherlands.
So you're asking me which part of Belgium?
Yes.
I have no idea. They're the ones that listed it. I'm not sure if they specify that. I imagine it's in the footnotes where they did the test, but in this, but yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I do find it interesting if the Israelites from Palestine spread northward. I mean, remember the 10 lost tribes? They're over there in to the east in old Assyria and put in various places. Some say Iran and so forth, and they later spread northward into Europe. I find all of this interesting, that most of this is in Europe. I mean, a lot of them are in Europe, and that could be why some of that's there. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what part of Belgium he tested. Any other questions?
Rick has raised his hand. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, thanks again for a fascinating continuation. I failed to get your complete email address. I got UANIST
At yahoo.com.
Yahoo. Okay. Thanks. The phrase Uto-Aztecan kind of, I can get the Aztecan part, like it's from Aztec. What is the Uto part describing?
Uto are the Utes. The
Oh,
Utes of
okay.
Utah. And
Right.
yeah, Utes on the north and Aztecs on the south is where the name for the language family comes from.
Okay. Okay. If you were to make a new name for this language that you found, it seems like all these languages are going back to the Semitic and the Egypt languages. When you did the comparison with the, they're like the three words that were very similar.
Uh-huh.
Is there anyone that has thought of, changing this name, the Uto-Aztecan, to, Semitic Egyptian? To really describe the source of this mother language. Now we have the offsprings now that are called Uto-Aztecan. I just thought, it was what you've explained is that these languages that we have in the area on the map on the screen really originate across the ocean. And
Yeah, that's a good point. You have a good point.
I didn't know if there was a name that would reflect their original origin, so that we could really get a picture of, well, they didn't originate in Utah and they didn't originate in Aztec land. Even though they're there, they originated in this other area. Yeah,
and if it was only LDS people that were doing this naming, that could be very it could be a possibility to think about. The problem is that I'm the only one proposing this, and all the other 30 Uto-Aztecanists and several thousand anthropologists would certainly not be in favor of renaming it. Another point is that these languages, these Near East components that came into Uto-Aztecan are only, maybe about half of Uto-Aztecan. You'll notice in these works, we found the one on the right that Jerry helped me publish has a little over 1,500 sets, cognate sets from Semitic and Egyptian. But in the other book of Uto-Aztecan cognate sets, there are over 2,700. So you can see that it's about half of them come from these Semitic components, but there's the other half that really are from whatever native language groups they mixed with or associated with or borrowed from. And so it's not only the Semitic and Egyptian component, it really is other Native American stuff that was already in the Americas that they've mixed with. And so it's in keeping with that half of the data, sticking with Uto-Aztecan would be.
Yeah, so there's not enough to change the name to reflect
right,
or 50%. Okay, could you go back to the slide that has like the hand-drawn, hand-colored map? It's got like different colors, very
Okay.
simplistic, but that's what I like. No, a little bit.
Okay.
Yep, that one. Yep, that one there.
Okay.
Okay. You had said that you compared Muskogean and you did a lot of the language in Muskogee, comparing it to the Uto-Aztecan and as well as the Algic. So did the one in the blue and the one in the yellow also have influences that the Uto-Aztecan as languages did?
Yeah, what happened is, so these three language families are not related to each other, but they have received the same infusion. They have received the same contribution. So those words that I showed you that are the same in Muskogean and in Uto-Aztecan,
Right.
are 200 or 300 words out of, again, 2,000 or 3,000. And so the language families are not related, but they both have received the same infusion that is infused into them from the Lehite or from these Book of Mormon people. So again, lots of evidence that there's lots of stuff in the Americas that it has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon. But what this suggests is that these Book of Mormon language speakers have infused into a few language families. Like I think I mentioned last week, we have about 160 to 170 language families in the Americas. And this kind of stuff is strongest in these four that I've mentioned. But there it is also in another 6 or 8, mostly in the Northern Andes. So we have maybe 10 language families that have received this infusion out of only 160. So again, it's a very small component, but nevertheless, it has turned up and is showing up in these few language families. So yeah, these language families are not related to each other, but they have received the same infusion. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I heard you say that these language families did not come from the Bering Strait, and they did not come from the north to the south,
Right.
from North America. And so that only leaves kind of from south to north, or some kind of ship travel carrying people from south to north.
Yeah, good question. Let me talk about that a minute. Of course, the anthropologists and linguists all say that Native America was populated by the land bridge, Bering Strait, and all came from the north and filled the Americas thousands of years ago and so forth. What's interesting is that the language evidence and linguists, because of that, linguists have been trying to make the connection with Asian languages. And there are 2 language families that, possibly 3, but 2 language families that definitely have that Asian connection. One is Athabascan, because Athabascan covers all of Alaska and the western half of Canada. And then you have Navajo and Apache in the Southwest. Those are the Athabascan languages. Those have been demonstrated to have come from Asia across the Bering Strait. In fact, they can specify a fairly specific area in Siberia where most closely related to those. The other one are the Eskimo Aleut language family, and they have not finished crossing. About half of them are on the America side, and the other half are still on the Siberian side. So that one has been demonstrated linguistically to have come from Asia, and is still in process, or got stalled halfway. Half are on the one side, half on the other side. And those are the only 2 that have been demonstrated linguistically to the satisfaction of linguists to have come across the Bering Strait. The others are a big question mark. Now there's DNA stuff that will suggest what groups have good matches with stuff in East Asia on the other side of the strait. But language evidence, those are the only 2 that have been shown out of 160 language families have been shown to come across the Bering Strait. So yeah, most of the language families, it's still a big question mark. And another thing is that sometimes linguists and anthropologists get a little bit simplistic and say this language family is either from that or from across the Bering Strait or whatever. My feeling is that many of these language families are mixtures, so that a language family can have both Lehite stuff and Bering Strait stuff. In fact, I think a lot of these language families have both. The Navajo are a good example. Their language is from across the Bering Strait. Their language, they are part of the Athabascan language family. Um, and their language definitely came from across the Bering Strait, but their DNA matches the peoples around them, which suggests they have been mixing quite a bit, and especially with the Pueblos, which are definitely this Uto-Aztecan stock. And so they've, people ask me when I tell them that the Navajo and the Athabascan language family came from across the Bering Strait, and they say, oh, well, so the Navajos aren't Lamanites? Well, they're as much as anybody. All of them are mixtures. All of them are only partially of Israel anyway. But they are as much as anybody, but they've simply, they've gotten their Lehites by mixture being in the Southwest. And so they are definitely part Pueblo. And I think I mentioned last time, my friend who looked Hopi to me and so forth, that the Hopi have lots of Navajo blood and the Navajos have lots of Hopi blood.
Okay, thanks. I'll mute now. Thank you.
We have,
You're,
Oh, another thing I was going to mention is that this map suggests to me that the original Book of Mormon area was in Mesoamerica, because wherever you launch into the West Sea from Central America or wherever and sail to the land northward, these 29 Uto-Aztecan languages fit that very nicely, besides having 30 some dialects scattered all over Mesoamerica here. And as for these two, just going up the coast, the Gulf Coast, till you hit the Mississippi River, and then going up the river systems, that explains how those got here. So these Muskogean infusion did not come across this way. I think these infusions both came from Mesoamerica, Muskogean being a northeast extension and Uto-Aztecan being a northwest extension. And the Algonquian, they just went further up the river and mixed with whatever else. Algonquian has a whole bunch of other stuff. Algonquian, this Semitic and Egyptian stuff that I'm finding in Uto-Aztecan, Uto-Aztecan has the largest percentage and the clearest case. Muskogean is probably second, and it has about half as much as Uto-Aztecan does, maybe less than half. And Algic or Algonquian has even less than that. Nevertheless, there are some interesting key terms. So all of these have mixed into other groups, and so they're only partly Lehite or Nephite Mulekite merger mixed into these groups, mixing with a whole bunch of who knows what else. And then in the Quechua, then from Mesoamerica, you just go a little ways south and you're in the northern Andes. And so it's very interesting that these groups in North America and the northern Andes and South America have the same infusion, which would also suggest an original Mesoamerican starting point. But the Heartlanders who talk about the Hopewell area, I agree with them that they probably are Nephite, a Nephite infusion into this area, mixing with everybody else who was already here, and Muskogean probably some of that group. But nevertheless, where I would disagree with them is that this is not the whole original area, but this is one of the extension areas. So my own personal opinion at this point with the data I have is that, hey, the original area is this, and Uto-Aztecan's the northwest extension, the Hopewell stuff, and the Heartlanders are finding good, interesting stuff, and that's a northeastern extension. And the people who like Peru and talk about that as where it all happened, yeah, there's definitely the Lehite stuff down in Peru. But again, it's not the only stuff. I'm trying to figure out, how did I move this? Get more in the center there. Okay.
okay,
Yeah,
so
good. Any questions?
we've got Larry and then Jerry and then Ron. Larry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I take, as an engineer, I tend to take like a 30,000 foot overview to everything. So when I look at combination of genetics and linguistics and languages, I go back to even the mass migrations out of Africa, which established all of humanity, but not necessarily faith. And we always have to remember that the Book of Mormon and the Bible is about our faith as much as it is anything else. And we can trace the origins of our faith back to the story of Adam and Eve, who probably came out of Africa and settled into the Middle East. And then we have all the stories of Enoch up through Noah and the reset of the flood of Noah and his sons then coming into the Middle East and repopulating Egypt, the Middle East, all the way up into Turkey and all the way over to Persia. And so it's no surprise to me that our faith, linguistically and genetically, all comes from the Middle East, all comes from that area, because that's where the Bible says it comes from. And the Book of Mormon only goes back to 600 BC. It doesn't go back to, it traces the Melchizedek priesthood, or the prophet does, back to Adam and Eve. And so I think we always have to bear in mind that we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about humanity and we're talking about faith. And what role does faith play on our, on our destiny as a human race? So I think the Book of Mormon, the Lehites and the Nephites did come into Central America. I mean, that's quite clear. At the same time, thousands of years before that, people were walking out of Africa and walking up to Russia and walking up to Europe, and then walking across the Middle East over into China. And so the humanity and faith are different. And then if there was a Bering Strait that they could walk across, they came across and got into the northern parts of Canada. And meantime, other people were walking. Once you got sailing ships and you could get into Central America, then you could walk up. And so I think what we have here is the story of how the human race is supposed to come back together, because we are called to eventually gather the stick of Joseph and gather the stick of Judah and bring them back together. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing history and prophecy play out in real time. And I think your linguistics are proving that. And I think the genetic studies are proving that. The Bible and the Book of Mormon are both true. And we just have to take our knowledge, because we're called, Eve ate of the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge is supposed to teach us how to come back together to the tree of life. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I think we're bringing the human race back together to the tree of life, and that will lead to the day of peace and prosperity, where violence and poverty can be ended by following the precepts of the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And I think that's why I love this group so much, because it's proving every bit and piece of it. One person has a gift of linguistics, another person has a gift of genetics, another person has a gift of prophecy. Teachers, we're all coming together. And we are to take the Book of Mormon into the world, because that's the stick of Joseph. That is what leads to the gathering of the Ephraim back to their land of inheritance. Jacob's well is their land of inheritance. And, the US, if you look at the Book of Mormon, the Republic is the land of promise in the Book of Mormon. And the Gentiles brought the Bible over to the Nephites and Lehites, and with their descendants. And so I'm just fascinated with the fact that every bit of science, the study of creation, science is the study of creation, faith is the study of creator, is coming together, both having proof that we are getting there as a human race. Got a long way to go, but we're getting there. And so that's just a comment I wanted to make.
Okay. Yeah, this
Thanks,
is
Lord.
Lehite mixing into a whole bunch of other things, and who knows what those other things or where they came from or how long ago. So yeah, there's a lot of things to be figured out yet.
Thank you, Larry. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, Brian. I'd recently been going through the book and other things. Seems to me that the Lamanite, kind of associated with the Maya culture in terms of their, cultural description. And you're not finding much in Maya. And then it seems like you're having Mulekite influence in Uto-Aztecan and these other two groups, right? Which are, you would not expect the Lamanites as being separated. Would have
Did we lose you?
So I'm just wondering, are we kind of saying that these are probably more Nephite generated infusions?
I'm not-
It says my internet connection is unstable. Is that just me, or did everybody have a pause there?
No, you were paused a little bit, but I think it was on your end.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Jerry. I couldn't hear you. My internet connection went out for a few seconds there. Just
That was probably an act of God based on my question.
you're talking about the Mayan, yeah, yeah.
Well,
I agree. I think the Lehites, the Lamanites mixed with the Mayan and probably adopted their language rather than really contributed to it much. So I don't doubt that the Mayan are very much, or have a good percentage of Lehite blood, even though their language is who knows what, perhaps a Jaredite branch. But yeah, what else is your question?
yeah, I was kind of basically saying it looks like you have Mulekite influence even in the other two groups as well. Is that what you're saying? You didn't really go into that, the different dialects, northern and that, but in the Mesquite.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. This language infusion that I'm seeing in Muskogean and Quechua is from that Nephi Mulekite merger. So there are both strands in Muskogean and also in Quechua that we see in Uto-Aztecan, the Semitic Kwa and the Semitic P. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, right. I mean, these are not some, the Lamanites seem to have a different language and didn't really get very much of the, you're not just in the language families where they might be. And then I guess the other question I had is, there's a couple, 2 or 3 names that are Greek, right? Or thinking of Greek in the Book of Mormon. Are those really Greek? Have you looked at those? I mean, it could be, people speculate Mulekite, right? But like,
yeah, there could have been some Greeks on board of a Phoenician vessel might have gathered people from different places in the Mediterranean. And there's a word or two, but I don't, first of all, I don't know Greek very well. In fact, hardly at all. I've thought about studying it to add that possibility, but that would only complicate matters. People would say, "Hey, you're bringing another language," and so I haven't gotten very excited about looking at that dimension. But I'll bet it's there. I'll bet it's because I found a few words, even with a limited amount of Greek I know so that those Greek names in the Book of Mormon, I'll bet there's a Greek component on that boat too.
I mean, yeah, there's only a few of them, like 2 or 3, so it's not a very large number of names.
Right.
But then I guess the other question, so do you feel like you're complete enough with these other 2 language groups for publication? Is that what you're saying, or you're still?
No, not even close. Well, in Muskogean, I've actually got a comparative Muskogean vocabulary going, and I actually started one for Algonquian also. But if I worked on it full time, I might be ready to do it in 3 to 5 years. But the way things go and how many directions I am going, I'm not sure if I'll get it done in my lifetime, but all of those three, Muskogean and Quechua and Algic, would really be good for, if I don't finish them, for a young linguist to dive in and feel his or her life doing it, because it takes anywhere from half a life to a full life to really, and you have to know the stuff. I mean, you have to know the linguistics that everybody has done before and know the problems and know the data. And so it's really a half of a lifetime, or at least a 5 or 10 year effort to get it down, just to get familiar with the linguistics of the language family, to be able to take it from there and figure things out and make contributions. So it's a huge effort to master a language family, to be able to contribute to it. And like
Well,
I
that was,
said, it took me 30 years in Uto-Aztecan, and I'm 72, and I'll see what I can do for Muskogean and Quechua. And Algonquin has such a small percentage that I'm not sure if it's worth spending the rest of my life on it, but I want to do something with Muskogean and Quechua at least.
Well, one thing, when the book was published, it was hard to find peer review, somebody that spoke Uto-Aztecan, Egyptian, and Semitic.
Exactly.
Not a combination most linguists have.
Yeah, it's and like I say, the Uto-Aztecanist I sent it to said, yeah, the Uto-Aztecan looks good. And the Semitic scholars I sent it to about a half a dozen of them, people I didn't even know. I just found on the internet that they are, Semitic scholars, Hebrew and Semitic professors at various universities, and 2 or 3 of those answered back favorably. Said, hey, it looks like you know what you're talking about. The Semitic end looks good, but I don't know Uto-Aztecan, is what most of them would say. And so, yeah, that kind of thing is a major problem. It's requires enough specialties to really say yay or nay that people are looking at it and finding it interesting, but few are really commenting on it very authoritatively, shall we say.
My last question was, given the depth of time of the migrations, now that they're looking at way back 15,000 years ago from the Bering Straits and that, can you really actually do comparative linguistics that far back and have it be effective?
Good point. Yeah, the glottochronology, linguists figure that it's not really much good more than 6,000 to 8,000 years back. You get further back than that, and the amount of change that would have happened in that time leaves a small enough percentage of the original stuff that generally they like to only go back 8,000 or 10,000 years. And so yeah, it's that's what they're saying for all the rest of these, that they came over more years than that ago and changed enough that we can't recognize it as Bering Strait languages. And so you're right, it only goes back so far, although they sometimes make mistakes in estimating time depth from language. Glottochronology was developed by a linguist, and it had some popularity for a while, but then linguists started to find out that it doesn't really pan out all the time, especially when you have language mixes. In fact, in my book, I mentioned that Yiddish, if you do a glottochronological calculation on it, would suggest that it came from Palestine 10,000 years ago. Okay, of course, we know the Jews have only existed, they probably left there about 2,000 or 2,500 years ago at the most. And so, but because it has mixed with a lot of other things, it throws the calculation off a whole bunch. So the glottochronology would estimate that they left 10,000 years ago when actually they only left 2,000 years ago or so. And it's the same with all of this stuff. Uto-Aztecan is, some linguists calculate to have a time depth of 5,000 years, but it really only has a time depth of about 25, about half that. And for those very reasons. But most linguists agree that glottochronology does not work, that it's very fallible. So at least most of them agree on that now. So they try not to pay too much attention to what people are trying to figure out for time depth just by language. Now, you know, carbon 14 and all the other dating stuff, hey, go with those. But for language itself, dating mechanisms are not very accurate unless they live next to a language family where historically we know when it was there. Then we can date when those borrowings came into it. But that doesn't happen very often. In fact, hardly at all in the Americas. But in Europe, you know, that kind of thing happens now and then. You can tie it to history and figure out some things. But
Yeah, I also found just one other comment. I found it interesting, you know, the sweet potato and the Polynesian, because they've been making that argument, that and a few other words, maybe 4 or 5 words that seem to have been the same or shared. And then it was just, no, there's no connection because there's so few. Well, then they recently found, you know, the connection DNA wise between
yes,
Colombia and Polynesia. So
exactly.
have a little bit of linguistic evidence. Then they ended up discovering, oh, actually there was a connection. So
Exactly.
we'll see where it all goes. You know, that's what's interesting.
In fact, my what I always say about the Polynesians, about Polynesia and the Americas, those Polynesians, they found every dot of land in the whole Pacific. If you look at a globe, the Pacific Ocean is about 1/3 of the surface of the whole Earth. It is huge. And in fact, you just take the Polynesian Triangle, and there's a whole bunch outside of it. Take the Polynesian Triangle from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, and each of those sides of the triangle are twice as far as it is from Hawaii to California, or from Easter Island to Peru. And so if the Polynesians were such expert sea explorers that they could find every tiny dot of land in the Pacific, what would keep them from hitting the land mass that goes from the North Pole to the South Pole? I mean, they would have hit it several times, I'm sure. I mean, logistics just almost guarantees it. And yet, for some reason, anthropologists are, boy, they're slow sometimes, you know, to think that, oh, it couldn't have happened. I mean, it couldn't have happened. It happened all over the Pacific, and it's only a little bit further to the Americas.
Yeah, especially like Easter Island. I mean, that's like out in the middle of nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Jerry, were you finished?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ron, you've been very patient. Thank you. Go ahead.
Brian,
Yes.
while I was listening to your presentation tonight, a light bulb went off, and I thought Brian might just have some words to expound upon this topic that frequently comes up. And this goes back to when the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints changed the name to Community of Christ. And when that topic comes up, then invariably somebody wants to know, why did they change the name, you know, the long name to the short name? And one of the explanations that I've read about says that when we tried to go into other countries, it was difficult to translate that long name into another language. Is that anything that you have looked at or wondered about, or can say anything about?
No, I haven't really been involved with that, or even thought about it much. But that seems like a decent explanation, that the name was too long, so they shortened it. That might be what it was. I really don't know. I haven't kept up on those kinds of things at all.
It's never been important enough. Obviously, it's kind of a question of trivia nature, but
We have some Community of Christ audience here, don't we? Do they know anything about the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's something about it was a language problem. It was hard to make our church make sense when they would try to translate it into another language. Something to that effect, as I understand it.
That's
So-
possible. I've wondered about the two ofs, the Church of Jesus Christ. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's his church of Latter-day Saints. So it belongs to both Christ and the saints who
Mhm.
belong to it, which makes sense enough, I guess.
Yeah.
But, of is one of those tricky words that has several dozen meanings, and so it's interesting that we have to use it twice in that title. But hey,
Mhm.
that works too. It's kind
Yeah,
of belongs to everybody that's a part of it.
Right. I've heard that.
But
Yes.
but the translation problem, I can imagine that other languages might not have an of, and so how would you
Ah,
translate those two ofs possibly?
mhm.
I can imagine that in some languages it might be a translation problem, but usually you can solve a translation problem. But sometimes it can get tricky depending on the language.
Well, okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for taking the time these 2 evenings to tell us about things that, for my mind, never even thought about before. So, been a real education. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to touch upon translation problems, in the Book of Mormon, we have the brother of Jared, which is fine in English, but there are a number of Native American languages which have two words for brother. One means older brother and one means younger brother. So there is no generic term for brother. And then you have to decide, was the brother of Jared an older brother or a younger brother? Because you can't just say brother. You have to choose. So that presents a very sticky translation problem. So you run into those kinds of translation problems now and then that, in fact, every translation is a problem.
Yeah, I can see. You've made that very clear. Yes.
Must have been younger because they would have used his name, right? So,
Okay. Ron, were you finished?
Yes, I'm finished.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
David DeBarth has his hand up. David, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. A fantastic presentation. I'm intrigued with the idea that if the archaeologists, anthropologists are correct, the Earth was pretty well populated by 13,000 years ago. For that much time, the Nephite people had to have landed in an area where there was a huge indigenous population. And yet the Book of Mormon, as you read through that, makes it seem like it was totally isolated, totally pure, nobody else around. It would seem that your research is showing that indeed there was a mixing. Even though the Book of Mormon doesn't talk about a mixing, the languages would suggest that apparently there was mixing probably from the very beginning. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, let's see what. Let me figure out I had an idea on my brain and it just left me.
Okay, we got 13,000 years of population. Oh, well, over 10,000 years of population before the Nephites even land. So that would suggest by your research that there was a tremendous amount of mixing starting even then.
Yes.
Even though the Book of Mormon itself would suggest that the Nephite Lamanite population was almost totally pure.
I remember what I was going to say now. Yes, in fact, when Nephi speaks in, I can't remember if it's first Nephi or second Nephi, it's in my book where he talks about it was important for us to get the plates to preserve this language for our children. I'm just guessing that by that time, his children were playing with the kids of these other peoples and getting acquainted with them, and that association would cause that language to change And I'll bet he was concerned about preserving the language of their fathers because of the surrounding peoples that they were mixing with and associating with, and that were causing language change that he could probably see in his children. And there's another spot, I think Jerry brought up something last week about something mentioned in the Book of Mormon that would suggest that kind of contact. And so, yeah, there are little hints of it, but you're right. They talk like they're the only ones, but the evidence is that they were neighbors to a whole bunch of, that there were a whole bunch of people here, and they were neighbors to various peoples.
Okay, thank you.
SB has put something in the chat. Current prophet of LDS Church dictated to use the full name of the church, so not Mormon LDS, but the full wording, and this is in any language.
Yes, that was handed to us, what, 2 or 3 years ago. So yeah, we use the full name now, or at least most people try to. Any other questions?
I was trying to talk to you without bothering to unmute, so let me try that again. A couple of questions from your book that I would like to have you address. One of them, you spoke of the Book of Job being of unique language. Can you
Yes.
clarify that for us, please?
Yeah, the Book of Job, the language, the Hebrew in the Book of Job is very interesting and unique, and it's very Arabic, and well, I shouldn't say very. It in some ways is Arabic-like and Aramaic-like, which is understandable because Job was down there in the Edomite areas where the Arabs were. In fact, he might have been Arab, who knows? But and so the fact that language is the kind of Hebrew, or I should say the Hebrew in the Book of Job is kind of Aramaic-like and kind of Arabic-like, is very interesting to scholars. And there are a lot of unique words. There are a lot of words in Job that only appear in that book and nowhere else in the Bible. In any word count in biblical Hebrew, you have some words that appear hundreds of times, and other words that appear 10 or 20 times, and other words that appear 3 or 4 or 5 times. There's just go down the list. And there are also many words that only occur once, or they are only found once in the Old Testament. And most books have 1 or 2 of those, but Job seems to have more of those per running page than most other books. And so it's unique in a number of ways, and that's what I meant.
Well, one other question that you raise in the book that I'm in hopes maybe you'll allow me to raise because I find it so interesting, that is what happened to make it so that about 3500 BC, we have languages, written languages, developing in Sumer and Egypt and India and in China.
Yeah, it's interesting that ancient Egyptian and Sumerian in the between the rivers, Sumerian and Shinar, they call it in the Hebrew Bible. So you have language developing in ancient Egypt and in Shinar and in ancient China and in India, the Indic script, which is the only one of the 4 that has not been deciphered yet. You have it starting in those 4 places all about the same time, very consistent with Noah and Noah's time. So, it looks like his kids spread out and had, but they all developed different kinds of writing systems, but they all had a few things in common. They were all pictographic with meaning symbols. And so they're kind of similar in some ways, but they were completely different writing systems. So it's a very good question. But the fact that they all started about the same time and it happens to jive with Noah is interesting.
Well, in your research about the Jaredites, any tie across there that you can help us with?
No, I'm not really an authority in that area. I just read the text and try to imagine like the rest of you. But yeah, my guess is that Otomanguean and Michizokean and Mayan and something in the Andes and probably the Adena and probably other groups are branches of the old Jaredite that went different directions, and then who knows if they mixed with other stuff or not. And so there's a lot of, in my opinion, there's a lot of leftover Jaredite blood in the Americas, whether the language could be reconstructed or not. And I've mentioned that last time, that if it could, it would be a huge lifetime problem for some young linguist to devote a life to. But like you say, a lot of things came to the Americas over a lot of years. And so who knows what all is where and what combination of. And I've just tried to focus on identifying Lehi in the Americas. And so.
Well, and thank you for doing that and sketching it for us for these 2 weeks. I think we have been remarkably blessed to have your presentations, and I think the questions and discussion clearly demonstrate that people have been intrigued by what you have to offer. I anticipate that we'll be able to set up another opportunity for you to come share with us if you're willing, because there's so much more here to be discussed. But we're at 10 o'clock in the Central Time, and I recognize that with daylight savings for some of us, that's getting pretty late. But I think the floor is still open, but I do want to say express my appreciation for the remarkable contribution you made to the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Thank you very much, Brian.
Well, thank you. And yes, we can do some more another time if I find more stuff to present in a few more months or something. But yeah, that's an open up possibility. And thank you all for listening and your questions.
Ed, did you have a question?
I have a question. As I listen to you, you're someone who traveled very far and you went through so many countries. When I was studying Chinese, our professor pointed out there was a group of people from the Middle East that came to China, and then they just stopped there. And I always been curious, who are these people? You know, and it might be during the time when either they were, sent out to people the world, that's when people were sent out, or were they the people that came after, part of the Jaredites maybe, or that just decided we're gonna take a different route. And but these people, the Professor Gould said, they came and they peopled. I mean, they stayed in China, and they are very distinguished. They are different from the Chinese people.
Yes.
I'm acquainted with these people, and what can you tell us? What?
He might be talking about the Jewish people. I don't know for sure what people he's talking about, but there is evidence in China. In fact, one of the Jewish encyclopedias has an article and a picture of them, of Jews that are in China, and they have the customs of the Jewish, the rabbinic customs that suggest they left they left Judah before 300 BC, because they have customs that were changed after that. So they left very early, and there are Jewish groups in China that practice the Jewish religion, but it's not the Jewish religion that's practiced in Europe. It's the Jewish religion as it was practiced about 300 or 400 BC. And so that's interesting.
Yeah.
One more thing I should say is I haven't traveled very much. This extensive studying I've done, I just through books. I've never been to Israel. I've never been, I've been to Mexico a few times to linguistic conferences, but basically I haven't been out of the United States. I lived from, well, I was born in New York and I lived in Indiana and Hawaii and Los Angeles and then Utah and the Intermountain West. So I've lived across the United States different times, but I'm pretty much a homebody. I like staying here in the mountains and not, it's just because I'm getting old. I like, the way I like to travel is on the internet. You know, you can take Google Earth and look at any place in the world without having to pay the airfare and the hassle of plane and taxi and et cetera and hotels. So I'm not a big traveler, but I enjoy studying all this stuff in different areas of the world. Yes, but yeah, he might be talking about the Jewish people in China.
I think that's what it is, because he just mentioned people from the Middle East, and I go, oh, well, this is good, you know. And but I couldn't, you know, ask any more questions because it's during class, and he was just mentioning some of the interesting thing that happened in China. You have these people actually come right in the middle of their nation and live there forever, it seems like, you know. And so, you know, but it made me so curious. But every time you talk about other things, I wanted to ask that question and say maybe that's not the right time. But I just wondering, you know, if you knew more about it, and if you have any more chances to come and speak to us, you know, if you know other things about these people that would be interesting to us.
Okay,
Thanks,
sounds
Rena.
good.
Ed, did you have a question?
Not really.
Okay, I just saw that you were unmuted, so I was just asking. David DeBarth, you had your hand up.
I had my turn. Thank you, Deb. I think Rick is probably next in line.
Okay, thank you. Rick, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So sometimes I answer a question and or I ask a question and your answer is super detailed, and I appreciate that. But I'd want other people to have time to ask their questions too. I wondered about that altar or whatever it was in Nahum. Right, way back at the beginning or close to the beginning of tonight's session.
Yeah, we can find it.
Yeah, there it is. Very good. You said that, or if I heard correctly, you said that they didn't put in vowels.
Right.
But on the left side there, you said that it was translated Nahomi. Am I correct? Nahomi, like the
Yeah.
people of Nahum?
Yeah,
So,
no, you could, that's right. You could put other vowels in there. In fact, the modern Arabs living there now, you know, say Nahami. And so they do have different vowels. In fact, they're the Nichmi is another way that they say it. And so there could be vowel changes over time. It happens to fit Nahom really well, but you're right. The vowels are not written. So it could, you know, what they are saying
yeah.
could well be ancient, or it could well be changed from something ancient. In other words, it could go either way, and both are fine and both work.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they didn't have any vowels, how would they say the people of Nahum? You said it would be Nahomi, and so either it's implied in the language or it's written in the language.
Now the reason, so in other words, how did Nephi know it was called Nahom with an O? Is that what you're asking?
No, but that's a good question. Thanks for asking it for me.
Well, they evidently associated with the people there some. In fact, that's another thing that we need to keep aware of, that even though they kept to themselves and did not build a fire when they're traveling through various parts of the wilderness because there's robbers in the area and didn't want to be seen and attacked, They certainly did associate with various other peoples, especially in Nahom and Bountiful. There were people living there then. And so they became acquainted with them, and in talking with them, I'm sure Nephi just pronounced it how they pronounced it.
Yeah, that's
Probably.
fine.
Or,
That's fine.
yeah. Did that answer your
Okay.
question?
Yes, it did.
These other ones where I put the vowels in, what I did is other ancient South Arabic experts and Arab experts, these are common enough names that they know what the vowels are. So in other
Right.
words, when Semitic authors write only the consonants, it's because they know what the vowels are, but there are specific vowels for
Mhm.
this name Sawadum. The Arabic speakers know that that's how it's pronounced, even though those vowels are not part of it. And now
Right.
so forth. And Nahom's the same thing. That back in those days, they knew it was pronounced Nahom, but they did not write vowels.
Yeah, there's some talk about Hebrew not having vowels originally too, not the Nikud,
That's right.
the vowel
The
markings.
Hebrew Bible, when it was originally written, only had the consonants. The vowels were put in about 700 AD, more than 1,000 years after most of the books were written with consonants. The Jews made up a vowel system and filled in the vowels. So you're right. The original Hebrew did not have vowels either. Same with
Okay.
Arabic. Arabic did not have vowels originally, and they were added about the same time, maybe.
Okay, at the very beginning, you listed really quickly the Semitic languages, and I got Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. And I didn't
Yeah.
write. My memory could only hold 3 at a time.
Okay. Yeah, the Semitic language, the major ones are Hebrew and Aramaic. Now, Hebrew is, let me just mention that Phoenician and Canaanite and Hebrew are all the same language. They're simply different dialects. Phoenician is the dialect that was spoken in Sidon and Byblos and those Phoenician cities and areas. And Hebrew was spoken by the Israelites, and the Canaanites were kind of in that whole Palestinian area. They're some of the people being killed off by the Israelites. And but all of those are the same language. Each dialect would have a little bit different pronunciation or a few different words, but all of those are basically the same language, different dialects of the same language: Hebrew, Phoenician, and Canaanite. And Aramaic is entirely different. In fact, let me find the one slide that this one. Yeah, Aramaic was spoken in this huge area. The Aram is east of Manasseh, and it was a major language of the Aramaic Empire, which existed for a long time. And Aramaic has been a huge influence in the Near East, especially in Palestine it was for a long time. And that's why the Jews ended up speaking Aramaic by Jesus's time, is because it was that huge influence, and they just ended up speaking Aramaic because of the Aramaic influence. And so Aramaic is a big one, a major language. And then Arabic was also spoken up here in little pockets, but you know where the Arabs are. They're mainly down in Saudi Arabia. In fact, that's where most of them were, was in Eastern Palestine and in Saudi Arabia. When Islam became of the Prophet Muhammad and the rise of Islam, then they spread all over North Africa and various other places that they conquered, and established Islam and established the Arabic language and established Arab genes mixing with the people again. And so that's another major language. Ethiopic has about maybe 3 major Ethiopic languages down in Ethiopia, which is south of Egypt. And that appears to have crossed the sea because the Ethiopic alphabet is very close to the old Arabic alphabet. And so they figure it probably came from there. So, and then over in Iraq, over in between the rivers and the Euphrates and between the rivers, you have the big Akkadian Empire, and its descendants are Assyrian in the north and Babylonian in the south. And those became two different languages with time, both descended from Akkadian. And then you have lots of little ones. You actually have a lot of what they call Neo-Aramaic dialects or languages today, still spoken in pockets of Turkey and Iran and Palestine, where the Aramaic language has continued on for the last 2,000 years since biblical times and changed in different ways. And so there are a lot of small Aramaic dialects descended from ancient Aramaic. And then you have a few other smaller ones. I think there's Maltese and over the island of Malta. But the ones I've mentioned are the major ones, are the main ones. All the others would be very small. And
Okay, I didn't I didn't realize there was that many Semitic. I had heard that Semitic came from the son of Noah, Shem. Is that true? Is that a bad rumor? You know, like Shemitic or Semitic?
yeah, it's okay. A lot the modern scholars like to call it Afro-Asiatic, because Semitic, they have shown it to be related to a lot of the African language families. In fact, it was, I think, in the 1950s, it's only been, you know, maybe 60 years or so that it was demonstrated that about 5 or maybe 6 language families in Africa, plus Egyptian, plus Semitic, are all distantly related as a big language family that they now call Afro-Asiatic. Asiatic being the Semitic part and Afro being the African part. That language family used to be called Hamito-Semitic, after Ham and Shem, the sons of Noah. But of course, the scholars don't like biblical stuff, and so they change it to the
Yeah.
era instead of Anno Domini, year of our Lord. And so
Yeah. Before
so
the
it's not
Common
called
Era.
Afro-Asiatic, but yeah, there are yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But you said they changed the name of the family, and I asked the
That's
question.
right. You're asking about Shem and Semitic.
Yeah, well,
The Semitic comes from, yeah, some of the sons of Shem, like Aram, did end up speaking Semitic languages, but some of the sons of Ham, I mean, for example, Phoenician and Canaanite, that's Semitic. And so it seems like the Semitic languages kind of developed with an area of people, and some of them were descendants of Shem, and some of them were descendants of Ham, and
okay,
so yeah, it's kind of a mixture, and not really a cut and dried thing.
okay,
But one thing that does seem to be somewhat more substantiated is that Indo-European is Japheth. In the
It is
Table of
down
Nations,
to
Genesis
bit.
10, you have the grandsons of Noah. You know, it lists the sons of Shem and the sons of Japheth and the sons of Ham, and they know where a lot of those are, maybe 2/3 of them. There's some of them that's debated and they don't know for sure, but many of the descendants of Japheth are Indo-European peoples related to the Germanic and the Greek and the Latin and the Hittite and the Indic of the ancient Sanskrit of ancient India, and the Slavic of Moscow area, and the Celtic languages, and so forth. And so, yeah, the Japheth seems to be the father of the Indo-Europeans to a degree. But then you got all the other languages of the earth. You know, I mean, there are a whole bunch of others, and so who knows the whole picture. There's lots of people putting forth theories, but few of them are agreed upon by everybody.
well, if God hadn't scattered the people and changed the languages, you would have had a different career.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you. I'm curious. So this current conversation, how do you feel about the Tower of Babel?
Well, that's a good question. Now that you asked, I'll answer. I don't know for sure. That's the short answer. The longer answer is that, in fact, I mentioned this in the book, that not everybody was at the Tower of Babel. And so whatever happened at Babel, there were many other groups elsewhere that were speaking the language of Noah, and their descendant languages simply changed naturally as languages naturally change. And so we're not affected by whatever happened at Babel. And Indo-European, I think, is one of those. And it might be that if you read it carefully, and if you read the Pearl of Great Price carefully and kind of combine those two, Egyptus settled her son in Egypt, and the Babel was built by, was it Nimrod? And was he, it's possible that Afro-Asiatic was, and Egyptian was out of the way and not involved in that. And it's also possible that Semitic, it might be that Sumerian is a very different language, not related to anything else. And so what is Sumerian? Sumerian is in the place where the Tower of Babel was. So was Sumerian the one result that was messed up at Babel? Or and also in the Table of Nations, you have in Genesis 10, you have in the Old Testament, it says, and they traveled from the east and stopped in Shinar and built the tower. But in the Joseph Smith translation, it says, and some of them traveled from the east and stopped in Shinar and built the Tower of Babel. Now, what that means is that some of them did not come from the east. Some of them stayed in the east. It says some of them came from the east. And so what that suggests is that there are other people that were not involved at Babel. Whatever happened at Babel was only a percent, some of Noah's posterity. There were probably other groups, other places whose languages are simply changing naturally. Another possibility is that
Brian Nowlin?
Pardon?
Jan? My wife was asking me a question. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
I see. I thought, okay. Another possibility is that what happened at Babel was something like that too. It might have been that the Adamic language was so fine, with so many, a greater number of sounds, and so fine that that it would be hard to hang on to very long. Children tend to combine sounds, and so it could have been a single generation thing that lots of changes were happening. I don't know what happened at Babel, but yeah, something happened, but who knows exactly how it happened. My only opinion is that there are many other peoples away from Babel that were not involved in Babel, whose languages simply changed naturally.
Thank you. I had an aha as you were talking about those different languages. David and Goliath, the Philistines and the Israelites were able to yell insults at each other. They obviously had more language communication than I'd ever thought of before.
Yeah, and that's a good question. The Philistines, some of them say they were the sea people, and some people think they're related to Greeks, but other people think those sea people were simply the Phoenicians, and that's probably, I mean, and Phoenician is basically Hebrew. So if they were, and even if they were of some other nationality, as soon as they landed in Palestine and were living amongst the Phoenicians, they would have adopted their language. So yeah, they're probably just yelling Phoenician and Hebrew at each other, which is the same language, just slightly different dialects. So yeah, they wouldn't have had no problem understanding each other, even though they were different peoples of different origins.
Thank you.
Larry has his hand up.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
one of the things that keeps becoming, to me, an interesting tie-in in all of this is we're looking at combining the history of our faith with the history of other people's faiths. And so that, and as far as I know, the Christian faith, as we know it now, and you know, it comes from Christ. But I think the most overlooked thing is the Holy Ghost of Pentecost. That's what Christ left behind, the Comforter. And we're the only faith that has that, as far as what I can tell. And I just wanted to know if your study in linguistics would confirm that.
No, I haven't found anything relating to that.
Have you looked?
Yeah. Nothing in my language research that would be relevant to that.
I think it'd be interesting to know, because the prophet Muhammad came 700 years after Christ, or 700 years after the Comforter came, the Holy Ghost of Pentecost. And
Yeah, well, you know, the Lord says that he gives to different peoples what they're ready for in whatever time. And so I don't know, I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I don't doubt that there is a degree of inspiration there, whether it all happened exactly like it's written down. And he didn't write any of it down. Remember that it was his followers who wrote the stuff down, and whether they got it all exactly right or wrote it down right, even if what he said was originally right, is a big question. But you know, I wouldn't doubt that he had some kind of a spiritual experience. I mean, there are a lot of people who
oh yeah,
are not recipients of the Holy Ghost whom the Lord visits and inspires in different ways. Columbus being one, of course.
Mhm.
And so who knows? I really, I would not dare comment too specifically about any of them, but yeah, I don't doubt that there's lots of other interesting incidences of inspiration from above.
Yeah, and I'm thinking along the lines that within our faith, we can pass it on from one to another by the laying on of hands. I have no doubt that the Holy Ghost can deal with whoever they want to at any moment in time as directed by God.
Exactly. In fact, you know, it says the light of Christ guides everybody to the degree that they'll listen to it, and to the degree that they keep it by not offending it too badly. And so another thing I might mention is that of all these religions inspired from heaven, revealed from heaven, notice that most of them develop into apostate groups later. I mean, the Israelites, Moses brings these great revelations, and various prophets have their books written of wonderful revelations like Isaiah. And by the time of Christ, they were fairly apostate simply because they did not even recognize the God of the Old Testament. They had not the Spirit with them, and had changed the stuff into their, you know, their many detailed things. And so he was basically restoring the religion of heaven amongst his apostate Israelites. And then the Christian church continued for 100 years or possibly two, but even in Paul and the apostles' days, it was the apostate stuff was creeping in. And so, you know, and who knows, you know, I read the Quran, the foundation scripture of Islam, and it talks a lot about being merciful. Well, you know, I don't know if 1,300 years later, I can see lots of lacks of mercy in some of the branches that have broken off from that. So, you know, apostatizing from the original pure revelation is typical of mankind.
Thank you. Ed has his hand up. Go ahead, Ed.
Yes, I've always been intrigued by, in the inspired version, the Joseph Smith version of Genesis, that Adam was taught the pure and undefiled language of God. I mean, that's what it says. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing is that God assigned a task to Adam to name all the animals. I mean, how long would you have to study the language of God to know the names of all the animals? There is so much information that can be coded into a language. I'm sure there are depths. If there is a pure and undefiled language of God, I'm sure plumbing the depths of that language would likewise be a lifetime endeavor.
Yes.
But is it all these language groups apparently either sprang from that initial breathing of the image of God into Adam and Eve or into Adam. It's a very intriguing thought.
Yeah, in fact, that's kind of along the lines of something I alluded to earlier, when simplification is the biggest force in language change, simplifying things. And it's interesting that in any language family, the sounds are reduced. For example, in Semitic, in Proto-Semitic, they reconstruct 29 consonants. Arabic has 28 of them, lost one by merging it with something else. Hebrew only has 23. They've merged about 6 pairs of sounds. Akkadian only has 18, even though it's the most ancient. They merged them really fast. And I don't know if that was an effect of Babel or not. But in all of these language studies, a proto or original language will have more sounds, and the descendants all reduce them. And I'm thinking that may well have been what happened with the Adamic language. It might have had, let's suppose it had 50 or 60 very fine divisions of different sounds, so that if you were a really good speaker, it worked fine. But for the coming generations, maintaining those distinctions would not happen very long, and there would be many mergers of sounds that become the same, and the number of sounds being reduced. For example, in the Polynesian languages, some of those only have 8 or 10 consonants, and so something like that may have been what caused a lot of this rapid change. You know, for languages to change, they usually figure it happens slowly. But if you have something that's very fine with lots of phonemes, it could change real fast in a number of different directions, such that you could have a lot of different languages in just a few generations that would be more different than usual in that same time frame in today's language situations, if that made sense.
Well, in today's language situation, you could also have very simple language. The woke generation would only need one word: racist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was intrigued one time. I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but someone had pointed out that our word snow, that the native Alaskan people had 50 different words describing various aspects of snow. And that's sort of what you were referring to.
Well, yeah, something like that. You're right. That would be the same kind of fine tuning of meanings, and I was talking about fine tuning of sounds. But yeah, that is. It was what's his name? Somebody who was a contemporary of Sapir. Anyway, yeah, that was a theory in linguistics that our perceptions of the world are based on our language, which is kind of okay to a degree, but it's really not entirely right, because even we English speakers who only have snow, you know, if you live in snow, we can distinguish between fresh snow wet snow and dry snow and crusted snow, and whether it's safe, what kind of skiers can determine, look at snow and know how it's going to be in skiing on it, different kinds. And so we can perceive differences even if we do not have the language to express the differences. So the mind is much greater than language distinctions. So that guy had an interesting point, but it wasn't entirely correct. But yeah, you're right. It's that kind of thing in meanings and in sounds that could have been the case and that were later simplified.
And they
Very
may,
good.
excuse me,
Right, Rena?
can I speak now?
Yeah, go ahead, Rena.
And they may have new words that they put together. For example, we come out with the computer and with other things. It could be they came out with something that somebody invented and it's a new word and we never heard
Exactly.
of it before.
Exactly right. Yeah, new words are being developed all the time as new things were being invented, and as the invention got passed from people to people, they would either adopt the word that the original people had, or they'd make up their own word about this new item. So you're right. We
Right.
did have computer and gigabyte and all those terms a few decades ago.
Because for me to translate a computer, you have to use a lot of words because we never have anything like that. We just say a computer. That's it. In Tahitian, but if you really had to tell a Tahitian person what this item is able to do, you have to explain it, what it does, because they
Right.
will not understand it.
That's why the word is often simply borrowed. So in Tahitian, they simply borrow the word computer because it's simpler, and that happens a lot. Just borrowing the word with the new technology. Yeah, I call it magic box sometimes.
Yeah, magic box. Exactly.
Let's check the magic box and see what it says when I want to look something up.
Or you could convert the verb to a noun, such as in you're going to Xerox something. And then because Xerox becomes it's
Exactly.
adopted in that form.
Right. A Xerox machine.
People don't Xerox anymore, they just send you a copy.
This is
Brian, I want to say thank you for one special little contribution. My brother has raised this theme of the people that the Book of Mormon leaves out at least a dozen times in our forum. And you're the first person to actually address that matter. And I think convince him that there's really legitimate information here to support the idea that those people existed. And I really appreciate your doing that because he's been pushing on that theme. And now here you also identify it with the Tower of Babel and support the idea that there's extraneous people out there that also are children of God, that that if he's no respecter of persons, then we ought to be able to appreciate them as well.
Come on, Paul. I've only mentioned it 2 or 3 times on this forum.
Okay, a dozen for me.
A
True,
lifetime.
true, a dozen for you, but not that often on the forum.
Okay. Well, it is approaching 11 o'clock in the Midwest. I hesitate to call a close, but I think we probably should, just because some of us need to be able to get some sleep tonight.
funny, guys.
Hey, thank you. Enjoyable evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gonna close us out, Paul?
Good night. The Lord is watching o'er you. Good night. His blessings go before you. Good night. And we'll be praying for you. So good night. May God bless you.
Good night.
Thanks,
night.
guys. Night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, you roasting, Deb.
Thanks,
You're
Deb,
welcome.
for doing 2 jobs.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Did a good job. That's right.